Peace and blessings. I'm Reverend Waltrina Middleton. I am the Executive Director with Community Renewal Society. I am very pleased to be able to be in dialogue, the sacred dialogue, with my pastor, mentor, and friend, big brother, OM3, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. I want to thank you so much for your time to share in this very important and critical conversation. And I just ask you to introduce yourself and share with us how you enter into this conversation.
Well, thank you first, Reverend Waltrina, for doing this. My name is Otis Moss. I serve at Trinity United Church of Christ on the south side of Chicago. And I come to this conversation, it's been quite some time. Probably when I was very small, there's a pastor by the name of Dr. Wyatt T. Walker. Dr. Walker, who served at the Canaan Baptist Church in Harlem, New York. But many people probably know that name because he was the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. While Dr. King was making his way around the country, it was Dr. Walker who was called to do all the administration, to make sure that the office was running, people were being trained, organizing communities. He was really the right-hand man for Dr. King to ensure that all of the not only administrative but even funding issues were being handled as he was traveling around the country. And I heard Dr. Walker, I'm trying to remember when it was at the Progressive National Baptist Convention. And he was talking about the yearly trips that his church made to Africa, to the diaspora, and to the Holy Land. And he spoke about the importance of people of African descent, making a connection with not only Afro-Palestinians, but the Palestinian community in general, that is, as he said, is often forgotten in the American context. But there are so many commonalities between the experience of Palestinians who have been struggling for a home, who have been pressed between a variety of governments, where they are struggling with the Israeli government. They struggled with the Jordanian government. They struggled with the Syrian government. They struggled with all of these different governments that have not necessarily wanted to fully embrace their humanity and their cause. So I'll give you a prime example. This issue that we're dealing with now was set off when a group of Palestinians, after the 67 Six-Day War, I believe, they had worked out a deal with Jordan, the Jordanian government, that they could stay in particular homes. And the Jordanian government said, that we will put it into, we'll go to the UN and say that this land is yours, your family will have this land, and so on and so on. Well, after the Six-Day War, the Jordanian government never gave the documents or formally stated that this land, was these Palestinian families, which means that a new government then made the decision on what this land was. These people have been living there since the 1950s. And so they were under Israeli law, and the law of Israel. And then all of a sudden, a few weeks ago, someone says, you have to be evicted. It's not your land. But yet these families have been there since 1950, which you can imagine when I think the young man that I heard speak about his grandparents, he said that being under the anxiety of homelessness consistently is something that's difficult to deal with as a human being, that you're never truly home because someone has the right to say you don't belong here. And that speaks to the experience of people of African descent, especially in the Americas. where it is always claimed that we don't belong. We're not truly American. You're not truly protected under the laws of America. Let's take, for example, African American farmers. You know, their land was taken. You're not truly a farmer. We want your land, but we don't want your humanity, you know, because there's a profit in it. So Wyatt T. Walker made the connections that we understand the anxiety of living under the anxiety of perpetual homelessness. We understand the anxiety of a government that shifts its laws when it comes to us. And he said that the trips that he had been making over there, interestingly enough, there were a few celebrities that would go over with him from time to time. I think Wesley Snipes was one of the people who went over with him years ago. But he'd been doing this since the 70s, you know, and built these relationships with the Palestinian community. And he said, you know, there's so many people who look just like me. There's so many people who have this experience that we have. There's so many people who really want to build a relationship, and liberation theology speaks to this. So there has been I posted on Twitter, there's been a quiet connection between the African American community and the Palestinian community for quite some time. I mean, we talk about the African American community and the Jewish community, but there has been these exchange of trips and these relationships that have been built. But all these relationships are complicated. And when I say complicated, I'm terms of complicated by distance and complicated by the fact that, unfortunately, people just don't read. That we fail to have true education in and around how do we, you know, how the connection between South Africa and America, and the connection between the Palestinian situation and American Jim Crowism and apartheid and all of that, how these things mix together. And that upsets some people to say that you can't say that. Well, you know, from our perspective, when there's not governmental protection, we're not dealing with, you know, particular institutions such as, I'm not talking Hamas, I'm talking about citizen protection. And when we see the connection in reference to do all of the citizens, are they protected in the same way? And that's what Wyatt T. Walker was talking about. He was saying, where is the citizen protection? Am I included in that, or am I suspect? We're suspect here. You know, Palestinians are, you know, under the guise of suspect. Latino are under the guise of suspect. We're suspect. People of color are always suspect. And what complicates it is that you then have a community, the Jewish community, that has been suspect, that has also been in the framing of problem and other, and considered within the white community as non-white, which is another thing that complicates things with Black people and Jewish people, because you're like, you know, Black folk just said, hey, Jewish faith. And they will then tell you, no, history, we have been viewed as Semitic, non-white, and have been victims of the Aryan model of the idea that we're not, quote, Aryan, which leads to what we call anti-Semitic action, so on and so on and so on. So it's a really interesting, painful, you know, history, but ultimately it kind of comes down to issues of power and citizen protection, and who has the ability to of self-determination, and how do we assist people in having self-determination so that they can thrive? How do we allow societies and communities to thrive?
Yeah, and I think that's really critical, especially when we're thinking of, and I appreciate the historical framework that you provided, because it's really important to have that parallel and understanding of this interconnectedness with movements within the diaspora, as you mentioned, apartheid. And you're right, there are many who are offended at this concept, this idea that we're applying apartheid to what is happening to Palestinians. But when we think of the land grabbing, when we think of the use of force and militarized policing, and the discriminatory practices that segregate Palestinians, and the use of resources that's so needed, like water, to further marginalize, not having access to water. I remember at one of my visits in Palestine that the one community I was in, the sewage had piled up because the water was shut down for weeks in that community as a tool of punishment because of some children allegedly throwing rocks. And so when you look at apartheid, the concepts of apartheid and what that type of marginalization and disinheritance mean, it doesn't seem like it's far-stretched to apply it to this situation here. But what I also appreciate is that connection with the Black diaspora, apartheid in South Africa, and the civil rights movement in the United States. But if we were to look at the movements for Black lives right now, how would we align that with the urgency of now? And I was sharing just how my heart was just heavy thinking about the court case with George Floyd, and the way folks were holding their breath because we didn't expect that there would be any accountability in that case. And so even with all of the evidence, the video that shows what happened to the brother, you know, and with all the evidence that we see with the children dying and being killed, pulling out innocent bodies, how do we trust that there would be any accountability, let alone justice in this moment? One, and then two, how do we align that with the movement for Black lives right now, and so that we can understand the interconnectedness in our response?
You got a lot of things in that question there, Waltrina. I think that there's a couple of things that we examine. One, when we're talking about the movement for Black lives, we're talking about the movement for Black dignity, recognition, for justice, and for Black joy and Black love. I mean, that's what the movement of Black lives is wrapped in, the intersection of these things. But the spiritual values are how am I able to live out my full humanity? And in a world that disregards my humanity because it weaponizes my color. It sees me, it sees you. We go into certain spaces and we are viewed a particular way. We are considered a threat. And we do a disservice to the ability of a full human flourishing when it comes to the issue around Palestinians, when we frame the issue around a governmental model of saying, let's talk Hamas, let's talk terrorism, let's talk self-defense, when we need to raise the question of those who are human beings in reference to full human flourishing and thriving. Are we viewing a certain group of people as problematic? And what's interesting, in the US, the conversation is that way, because that's what the US likes to do. Other people, we got to have good guys and bad guys. That's what we do. What's very fascinating from my reading in Israel, you have a variety of people who are raising questions about what should Israel look like. You know, if you have 2 million Palestinians, and we have people who are secular Jews, and people who are religious Jews, and you have people who are Christians. You have a very diverse group of people. You have Falasha Jews, you have people from Ethiopia, you have all the people who've come over, and there are people who are raising questions about what that government should look like in order for everybody to flourish. And in raising those questions, you don't have the orthodoxy that we do in the United States, meaning there's only one way to look at it. There's only two ways to look at it. There are a variety of ways. I mean, I'm not an expert on the Middle East, but there's a variety of ways in which people there are raising questions about how do we create a space in which everybody is able to thrive, and we do not fall, in the words of Audre Lorde, just simply, trying to rebuild the master's house with the master's tools, and we end up replicating what has been extremely painful to us. And so I think that's on one side when you're talking about Black Lives Matter, that we understand the weaponization, and Palestinians by their name have been weaponized, and by faith, by location. We must remember Palestinian is not Muslim. That's a particular location. You can be Muslim, Christian, or Jewish, and you can be Palestinian and still have the anxiety of being perpetually homeless. So it's not one type of individual. The other piece is when we utilize the term apartheid, apartheid. Someone had said that's the correct way of saying it. I'm not sure which one, but that when we use that term, we're saying apartheid simply means that do you have people living within a geographic area where there is a particular government control, where those people are citizens or supposed to be citizens, and is there a different treatment between those individuals? Then you move, because apartheid is the child of Jim Crowism. That's how South Africa learned apartheid. They said, oh, look at America. That's a great system right there. And again, Germany learned its model of apartheid again from America. So America, I believe, has a responsibility, since we are the quote grandfathers of these systems or these ideas that you can have differing people in a geographic governmental location controlled by a particular government, and that you can treat people in a variety of ways. That's what we're saying. That's what happens when you're talking about, apartheid. You're saying, are people treated differently? The Palestinian community would say we're treated differently, not just by perception, but in terms of practice. In Israel, that is the argument around people who are saying, well, this is a self-defense piece. We've got to protect ourselves, this, that, and the other. There's a more conservative perspective. Then there's this real progressive perspective, says we need to build a coalition government where everybody's able to thrive. Those are the arguments that are happening, but those questions aren't happening here because they immediately get clouded in terms of how we talk about these issues. And we really should be talking about human flourishing, human thriving. What does that mean for all of our brothers and sisters? And how do people have these basic, how are their basic needs able to be met so that they can fully flourish as children of God? And that's the struggle. And I have a difficulty with America saying this is what should happen, because America is the country that exports the idea of caste and difference to everybody else.
And is also complicit in funding this violence, and also perpetuating it on its own shores as well.
Well, American foreign policy is problematic in itself. It just has been. I mean, we can go down the line of what we've done in the Americas, how we perceive the Caribbean. We are excited about Haiti, about the American government is excited about a Papa Doc and a Baby Doc, as long as it serves the interests. As soon as the interests are not served, then all of a sudden it becomes a completely different policy in its relationship. America was, very supportive of of Zaire. This, horrific, government, but it was serving the interests. And so American foreign policy is not necessarily rooted in an ethic of let's make sure that X, Y, and Z human rights abuses never happen. We've got a history of looking the other way. We say, well, what's in the best interest of the country? And that's why so many countries are saying, well, America, you look one way this way, you want us to do X, Y, and Z, you want this company to come in and profit. but you're not concerned about, again, human flourishing. How are we able to live a just future so that our children can grow and develop? That should be the fundamental question. And then all of the other questions come underneath that. And human flourishing means flourishing for everybody. Everybody benefits. That's what Black Lives Matter is about. It's about the fact that I wouldn't have to say it if all lives matter. If
Right.
if all lives
Right.
matter, I would never say Black Lives Matter, because that's one of the most obvious statements ever.
Right.
I mean, it's
Right.
I mean, what
Captain
obvious
Obvious.
statement can you make? It's super obvious,
Yeah.
but it becomes
Right.
revolutionary and offensive because we want to operate out of the myth that there is complete, utter equality and equity in America, and we can't live under that mythos. We're raising the question about full human flourishing. And we have to raise that in any context that we are engaging with any human being. And we can't act as if we know. We know everything. I don't know all of the history in reference to Israel and Palestine. I don't know all the history in reference to ethnic clashes in Nigeria. I don't. But I can say that a fundamental ethic should be full human flourishing. How we craft that policy, that's what we got to hammer out. But we got to start there. We can't start with a military ethic. When you start with a military ethic, we're going to go down the rabbit hole again.
Right. And it's inequitable because Palestinians say that I cannot come to the negotiation table with you until I'm free, that there has to be equity in both of our liberation for us to be able to broker an understanding of how we will flourish, how we will live together. Because as long as I'm oppressed and you're at the negotiation table with me and you're free, it's not going to be fair. It's not going to be equally distributed. So all human flourishing. I want to thank you, and I know that we must wrap up soon, but I want to ask you, because I love the way that you lift up Howard Thurman, and I think of Jesus and the disinherited, and just this whole concept of being disinherited, generations after generations. You know, I spoke with a sister who said that she remembered when her grandmother would tell stories of Palestine, you know, from the 1920s, but she herself never having set eyes, physically being able to be in the land. And so if Howard Thurman was speaking to us right now, at this moment of disinheritance, but also prophetic imagination, how would Howard Thurman speak to us? And how would Howard Thurman guide us as a mystic in this moment?
Rooted in America as a person of African descent, Howard Thurman would probably walk us through his book. He would say, remember, Jesus was a Jew. He would then remind us that he was also living in an occupied community. He would continue to remind us that he was despised because of his ethnicity, and that he was executed by the power of the state. And he says, and I think that he would say now, if the one that we follow is Jewish, the one that we follow is living in an occupied situation, is despised because of his ethnicity, and is executed because of the state, then all of the things that were pressing against Jesus, we should make sure that we expel from our spirit and from our communication and ultimately from our policy. Because the book goes on to say that when we live in fear, that one of the great hound of hell that chases and dogs the footsteps of the oppressed is fear, and fear of the other, fear of self. And he ultimately leads us to the idea of the love ethic, which says that we are inextricably bound together. So the pain of the Palestinian is our pain. The pain of the person who feels anxiety and who is Jewish is our anxiety about their about the state of Israel. The pain of person who is involved with Black Lives Matter, who is queer or trans, is our pain. We see that we are interconnected. When they're harmed and they're hurting, we have a responsibility spiritually to sit in their pain and then work together of how we work through the moment of suffering to alleviate the suffering. That's what Thurman would tell. What are we doing to alleviate this suffering? Or are we just, like, oh, well, that's just the way it is, that's people suffer, people die. So that, and that's sad.
Yeah.
Well, he would say we're called to alleviate that, and we have the power to. And if I may, I'm just kind of running my mouth, but I'm reminded of this. I have to go very nerdy Star Wars on you right now.
It's okay.
So when George Lucas originally did Star Wars, I read this article that he was kind of doing this metaphor about America and Vietnam, in that the empire in the Star Wars movies was representative of America. And the Jedis were kind of representative of the Vietnamese who, kind of wanted to keep, they wanted to keep their country. They were struggling, they're these little individual people. They weren't like this large empire. It was like these small little pockets of people. And the problem in the United States is we think we're Jedis, but we're actually the empire. We are more Sith Lord than we are students of Yoda. It's really, that's really the truth of the matter. And until we accept that we have leaned into the emperor's perspective, is the only way that we can free ourselves from this empire way of looking at the world. So Darth Vader, I'm not giving anything away, anybody hasn't seen Star Wars, but Darth Vader frees himself when he turns on the dark side, and he says, I have been in service to what has been destructive to me and destructive to my son. And he takes the emperor, throws him in the whatever he throws him into, little thing in little pit, whatever. In the last movie, which is a great little scene, but he becomes a father again. He gains his humanity again. He says, I can't live as a representative of the empire. Even though my legacy will always be about the empire, he's redeemed in that last moment to say, the way that I've been doing things just is not helpful for human flourishing of everybody in the cosmos. In America, we have a lot of influence. And when I say America, the fact that we're in this geographic area known as America as people of African descent, even though we are 3/5 as citizens of this country, we have some influence to help, I believe, the world release itself from Sith thinking, that it's either or, and we've got to return to kind of a Yoda-esque Jedi framework of the way that we view the world, and says that hate always leads to suffering. That's what Yoda says.
That's your Yoda impression, okay?
Yoda impression. And so we can't allow our souls to be encased by that. And so we raise the question, how do we alleviate suffering? Not that we want to cause suffering. What do we do? That is our call. And whether you're writing policy or poetry, whether you are doing sermons or doing community service, whether you are a community organizer, the question becomes, how do we alleviate suffering? What are we doing to alleviate suffering? And that's where because I come out of a spiritual framework. That's the framework that I raise those questions. Are we alleviating the suffering? Are we allowing human flourishing? Is liberation the fundamental ethic? Are we speaking for those who are voiceless? Are we standing with those who have been broken? And we don't get it right all the time, but it's better to fail forward than to choose to be silent in the midst of suffering and pain.
Thank you so much, Pastor Moss. Profound words that can serve as a call to action, but also as a prayer and moral accountability for our collective responsibility as members of humanity. I do look forward to the gospel according to Star Wars installation when you let me know when that's coming out.
It will be entitled A New Hope.
Oh yes, I like that. But I just want to thank you for taking time to be in dialogue in this urgent moment and in extended call for liberation for Palestinians. So bless you, continued blessings in your work and prophetic calling. So it's a blessing to be with you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Waltrina. We appreciate you very much, the poet laureate of Chicago and of Trinity. We thank you.